Fam, whenever we jump into a discussion about a Critical Role episode, we like to do a little bit of a recap. Episodes can be kind of long, and so we like to do just a 10 to 15 minute, here's what happened. And so we also like to split that off as a separate video if you want to watch just the recaps. So if you are watching just the recap video, there'll be a link in the description that has a full breakdown of our thoughts on the episode. And if you have thoughts on the episode too, we want to know what you think. So let us know in the comments as well. So this was episode 55, Hope Within History. And we are essentially picking up from where we left previously, which was, by the way, Will, your throat clear is picking up in the in the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought I would just settle that now before we go through the whole recap.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So we pick up right after the events at the DNO Emporium. And if you recall, the party basically helped Chetney's former boss partner, Ultgar, with firebugs. And now the party is heading to the diarchy, the king and queen, to basically discuss the situation with the bull and figure out what happens next. So the party begins making their way to the Citadel, and it's here that they explore kind of the relationship of the diarchy. If you remember what was discussed in a previous episode, and we get more clarity here, whenever Malesmere fell and the elves left, they were welcomed into Uthadurn, and that is really where the diarchy started. So we have an elven king and a dwarven queen. However, it seems to be political in nature. It doesn't seem to be romantic, and in fact, the party kind of questions how odd it is that, well, why haven't they consummated their relationship? Like, what's going on here? Like, are they like secretly in love? Are they openly in love? Like, what does this look like? And this is going to be actually a just kind of like a fun side point for the conversation that they're going to have. So all that to say, they make their way to the Citadel. There are a couple of interactions where guards are kind of like, well, who's that guy? Because if you remember, Chetney wasn't actually with the party in the previous encounter. But they're like, oh, he's with us. It's all good. And the party basically makes their way to the diarchy, where they have a conversation with the king and queen. And as you would expect, the king and queen are very much grateful for their help. And they begin to share more information about this celestial bull, basically explaining that, yeah, this was a creature that was one of the guardians of Malesmere. And when Malesmere fell, we felt it was only appropriate to bring it here and sort of like a way to honor it. And the party begins to ask about, well, what exactly happened in Malesmere? And the king is basically like, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was this toxic crawl of shadow energy under this big looming ruinous moon, to which the party, I think it's actually Abria, is like, was this during the Applebee solstice? Which Matt is just like, actually, Matt's going to have a lot of interactions this episode where he's just like, really, guys? And the king is basically like, I never thought about it, but yeah, I think it was during a apogee solstice. They also ask about Ludinus Deleth, and they explain that they had actually been on Marquette, that Ludinus was mostly responsible, or not mostly, was responsible for the situation they're in now. And the king basically explains, Ludinus kind of kept to himself. He really kind of kept to his own research, especially after some political drama with other individuals in Malesmere. But beyond that, not really knowing much about Ludinus. They also share some more information, most notably, scarily, that among the list of magics that aren't working, it seems that resurrection magic, revivify, and I guess those are the two mostly, but those kinds of spells are not working. And it's got Temples in a panic. And it's, as a watcher of the show, had me in a panic. And then all while this conversation is happening, the FCG is trying to do insight checks on the king and queen, trying to figure out, is there any chemistry there? FCG is going to roll a high insight check. He's going to get a whisper. Fern is going to do a high insight check, I think of a 30. Whenever they're talking about lewdness to the king, she's going to get a whisper. And then there'll be another whisper that I'll mention in a second, but lots of whispers from insight checks today. In this episode. They also ask about the Vellum Steeple. Hey, is there any way we can get teleported to see our friends? And they're like, the networks are down, like it's not working. And also another really important detail, the Apogee Solstice should have ended the day before, and yet it continues. They don't know why, but it seems to just be continuing on for some reason. So all that to say, they decide from this conversation to go to Malesmere. They get sort of directions from the king and queen, and it's going to be about a week's travel, and they have a variety of paths that they can take, but ultimately they're going to decide to travel there on Goat, which we'll get to later in the episode. They do mention Drixlix and his scheme with Ultgar, and provide the proof of that happening. And then also FCG does mention in such dire times, it would be great to have a loved one to cozy up with, to which there's an insight check on the king, and Imogen does detect thoughts and sees an image of a young elven man in the king's mind before that memory sort of vanishes, and there is like a sense of sadness, to which the king basically says, those times are behind me. So kind of sad. All that to say, the party then decides to, they do get a mithril half plate +1 as a reward, which ultimately goes to FCG. And the party then decides to basically split up. Some people are going to go to the Vellum Steeple, and then Frida and FCG are going to go to Jacoby's. Now, in this, as this party is splitting up, Frida does steal away with Deanna for a second, and basically is like, hey, I think I have a crush on FCG. I've never met anyone like him. Yeah, it gets a little spicy here. And there's this natural chemistry between them because they are Aormatons. They, in FCG's case, has never met anyone like themselves. And Deanna basically gives her blessing, is like, I love you. I'm happy for you. I hope it works out. Over at the Vellum Steeple, they do meet the Scribe Warden Uvasik, I think, who was the sort of pompous woman that they had met in the previous episode, who was like, we don't know what's going on. And as they arrive, the Scribe Warden basically hands over a file on Ludinus Deleth and is like, here's everything we know on Ludinus. And from this file, they find out a couple of things. They find out that Ludinus is actually not originally from Malesmere, but actually came from a small town in Isilra, and actually traveled to Malesmere later on, where he set up his home. And that Ludinus was also kind of a nobody, and until there were these two competing factions of wizards, that basically these factions broke out into all-out war on an evening called the Eve of Crimson Midnight, and that Ludinus was basically the hero who stopped this conflict, and because of that was able to leverage the creation of the Cerberus Assembly, was able to presumably get funding, or at least had the clout to begin to explore other arcane things, and really actually eventually became a bit of a thorn in the side in a number of temples and other political factions, to the point where he eventually sort of secluded himself, as we heard from the king, in his, I'd say like in his home, the Guild Hollow, or I can't remember the name for it. I don't know if you do either, but something like that. A place within Malesmere that he basically hung out. Yeah. So, and ultimately, whenever Malesmere fell, went full time into the Cerberus Assembly and eventually became known as its eldest member. So, meanwhile, they do meet. The Scribe Warden does introduce them to this this guards person who is deeply experienced on the Savalier Woods in Malesmere. And this person basically, Matt describes as basically Troy Baker. And Troy Baker is basically like, yeah, you guys are crazy for wanting to go. It's extremely dangerous, but best of luck. Just know that it's going to be like extremely dangerous. And there is an insight check on, what do you know about God Eaters? To which another whisper happens, which we don't know what exactly. Meanwhile, at Jacoby's, before FCG and Frida go in, Frida basically confesses their affection for FCG, and FCG returns it. And it's basically like, yeah, like I do feel a connection to you. I do feel this is special. I've never met anyone like you. FCG goes in for a little bit of a kiss, to which Frida goes in for a little bit of a kiss, to which FCG turns to meet the kiss full on.
What a move.
And this is probably the only sincere moment of disappointment I've seen from Matt, because FCG mentions their flesh tongue being involved in the kiss, and there's just a look of disgust on Matt's face. He's like, there is no tongue. You have no tongue. They go in, they meet Jacoby, and Jacoby is just, it's like a messy workshop, but he's this very upbeat tinkerer. And just like with Frida, they pop open the front plate of FCG and they look to reveal FCG's true name or true designation, Faithful Caregiver, which was just a really sweet moment. All this to say, in their conversation, they talk about, hey, could I get some, or Frida even mentions like, hey, FCG wants legs like me. And Jacoby's like, that would take a little bit of work. We can see what we can do. But in the meantime, they do agree to get the mithril half plate attached to FCG. And then from there, they decide to all go meet up back at their next destination, a clothing shop, which we go to break. And then, Will, you want to take it from there?
Yes, sir. Good job. So we pick back up with the other part of the crew headed to Catlin's Clothiers, or Clothiers. I don't know how you say it. And on the way, Chet pulls Imogen aside and asks how she's been doing with all of this, specifically with her mom's role and what happened. And Imogen says that, her mom's always been a comforting voice, like in her dreams, telling her to run and get away from here. But she's having to reconcile that with the fact that, she really did help Ludinus make all of this happen. So, maybe she should have just fought her when they ran into her at the solstice. And Chet asks, well, if we get a second chance, do you want us to take out your mom, essentially? And Imogen says she's not sure. But she does say if Laudna, Orm, and Ashton are gone because of what's happened, then yes, let's take her down. Meanwhile, back at Jacoby's, FCG finishes getting the mithril half plate integrated into themselves, getting that armor essentially. And Frida asks Jacoby about the possibility of using their power core to help empower Arcana. And Jacoby's like, maybe. And I think he does give this cable that could connect to their power core and then might possibly be able to connect to specific prepared enchantments. But Frida's wondering can we use this to communicate with the other team AOL? And Jacoby's like, that's not my realm of expertise. I don't know. So then we cut back to Deanna, and she quickly ducks into the Light Above Sanctum, which is a temple to the Dawnfather, and speaks with Evodon Leeds. And this is one of the priests, if you will, of this temple. And he actually asks her, hey, have you felt your connection to the Dawnfather diminish? And Deanna actually lies and says no. And he says, oh, well, you're lucky because his connection has been severed, and he and many others are very worried. Deanna actually gives him the 500 gold that she got from from Ultgar and doing the toy mission, and she tells him, hey, you're not alone, use this money, reach out, help those around you. And then they take their leave. The crew then actually makes it to Catlin's, and they present the royal decree, which gives them free stuff basically. And she doesn't believe them at first, but then she inspects the royal seal over a firelight and can tell that it's legit. So she's then more than happy to help them. And basically,
she sees
just
dollar signs.
Yeah, she does. And she basically then just says, or Matt says rather, just describe to me what the clothes you want, and we can get those made. So to quickly run through what people get here, Chetney gets like this velvety tracksuit, complete with like sweatband and armbands that
And a
will,
hoodie
yeah,
too.
and hoodie that will
Yeah.
grow and retract, kind of like the Hulk. So when he
Yeah.
transforms into a werewolf, his clothes won't rip. Um, Imogen asks for like this sheer flowy dress with long like fitted sleeves, like a leather kind of armor main piece, and a coat cut at the waist. I don't know what that means, but with a hood. Um, FCG asks for a long kind of like jacket similar to Frida's. And that's pretty much it. Deanna wants a green bodysuit to show off her figure, and
Which I
Frida
think she
is
mentions her figure is like Pixar-esque or something. So the Disney
yeah,
Pixar like
like
sling at the top
Elastigirl.
and then like yeah, dump truck bottom. Just a funny time, funny conversation.
Yeah, for sure. This whole scene is pretty fun. Frida is happy with their coat, but it is pretty like banged up, so they get their coat repaired. In addition to that, they get FCG's name like stitched into it, and then I think either they get Deanna's name stitched into it as well, or it already was there.
They already had Deanna's and they want to have FCG's added to it.
Okay, yeah,
Which I'm like, man, they're falling hard and fast.
yeah,
Which I
yeah.
think Sam even jokes like, we're basically married at this point.
Yeah, we'll talk more on that in the discussion, but yeah, for sure. And then Fern wants only like the finest of the fabrics, and she wants a corset, which basically like the joke's made is corsets for everyone. And she wants to have exposed legs, and I think those were mainly the details that she mentioned. So everyone gets their clothes made. There's a little bit of conversation on should we get some stuff made for the other half of the team, but they're like, I think Imogen's like, I'll think on it. Um, but so they get their clothes and then they decide to head back to Deanna's. Um, Once they make it there and they're inside, the party asks, "Hey, what were you guys doing in Eiselcross?" Which is a detail that just had come up in conversation earlier in the episode. And Deanna reveals that they were trying to find Aor, but there were basically monsters and Jorhassian soldiers everywhere, so they couldn't really, they couldn't really get that far. But they do want to go back at some point. The group then kind of puts together that Deanna and Frida are wanting to help them in their Malaismere quest. They didn't expect that they would be coming with them, but they're like, "Of course we are. Like, you guys need our help. Um, we're coming with you." So Belcells is pleasantly surprised by this, and they're like, "Okay, well, let's rest up, and we'll head out tomorrow morning after checking on our final couple of errands that we need to do." Um, but before bed, Fern says, "Hey, I left something at the clothing store," and leaves. But she doesn't go there. Instead, she makes her way just outside of the city to a small temple, like shrine to the Wild Mother. And there she asks the Wild Mother to talk to her friend Orem for her, and just says, "Hey, could you tell him that we're okay and we're alive?" She then waits to see if the Wild Mother if there's going to be any type of response, but and she rolls pretty high on perception, but all she hears is the wind. So she then heads back.
She's like, you're probably dead.
she, she then heads back to Deanna's and like quickly, I think, like wakes up Chetney that's on the couch and is basically like, "Hey, like if you don't make a move on Deanna, like I'm going to." And this kind of catches Chet off guard, and then she's like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna go return to the sleepover," and she goes back up to the room where she, Imogen, and Deanna are sharing a room. Um, they they talk for a little bit before going to bed, and the main thing they talk about is FCG and Frida's budding relationship. And so they lean up to the wall to eavesdrop, and they can tell that Frida and FCG like share another quick kiss, and Frida asks if they can draw FCG. So everyone goes to sleep. The next morning they have breakfast. FCG identifies the gloves, which I believe are the gloves they found in Drixlix's room, unless I'm confused. And he figures those to be the Weave Piercer gloves, which are basically these gloves that aid those who make spell attack rolls. So they're trying to decide between Imogen and Fern who should get those. So they head into town. FCG picks up some spell components, and they quickly stop by the Temple of the Matron of Ravens. Chet knocks on the door, and they basically just barely crack it open. And he's like, "Hey, can you guys still feel your god's presence?" And the person says that she remains, but her thoughts are distant. We trust in her plan. And then they basically like immediately close the door on them. So they're like, "Okay, well, let's go get some goats." So they head to the goat farm and they present the royal seal again for 6 flot-kept goats. And Matt lets the players decide, hey, you can kind of decide what your goat looks like and what their name is. So each person kind of runs through what kind of goat they would like. And after that, the trek to Malaeus Mir officially begins. And that's where the episode ends. Episode, once again, 55, Hope Within History. And again, if you are just listening to our recap and you want to hear Blake and I dive into our full discussion, which we are going to do now, check the description box below and you can find the link to that video.